Hi, everyone. Welcome to this co-production of WION and Voice of America live from New York City. I'm your host, Susan Tehrani. We're going to start off with the elections here in the United States with Democratic nominee Kamala Harris set to face off with Republican nominee Donald Trump for the US presidency. Harris's positions on military support to Israel and Ukraine, a rising China, and the migrant crisis at the southern border are all under increased scrutiny, as VOA White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara reports. Expect a continuation of the Biden administration's policies with a few shifts in emphasis.
Thousands of Central American migrants cross Mexico every year, heading for the U.S. border. Coordinating with the region to address the root causes of migration was a task assigned to Vice President Kamala Harris, leaving her open to attacks from her November rival, former President Donald Trump.
She was a bum, a failed vice president in a failed administration with millions of people crossing, and she was the border czar.
Harris is not the administration's border czar, but on immigration, she brings a tough message to the campaign trail, highlighting her experience as California's Attorney General.
I went after transnational gangs, drug cartels, and human traffickers that came into our country illegally. I prosecuted them in case after case, and I won. Donald Trump, on the other hand, has been talking a big game about securing our border, but he does not walk the walk.
If elected, Harris said she'll bring back President Joe Biden's border bill that was killed by pro-Trump Republicans in Congress. She'd continue his efforts to help Ukraine while preventing direct war with Russia and work to maintain unity among NATO allies. Also expect continuity in the Indo-Pacific.
The United States stands with the Philippines in the face of intimidation and coercion in the South China Sea.
And on trade with China.
She will continue, as she has said, to try to de-risk from China. We know that when she ran for president in 2020, she was fairly tariff averse. Like President Biden, she seems to have changed her mind about that. So more continuity than otherwise.
On Gaza, Harris is aligned with Biden, aiming for a ceasefire and preventing a regional war. However, with a large swath of the Democratic electorate angry at Biden's staunch support for Israel, Harris appears to be much more sympathetic to Palestinian casualties.
We cannot allow ourselves to become numb to the suffering, and I will not be silent.
Harris has embraced the Biden doctrine of leading by relying on allies and partners and has focused on non-traditional security threats, chairing the National Space Council and promoting the administration's policies on artificial intelligence and climate.
So when people say, oh, she just had the immigration portfolio and we have a terrible immigration problem, they aren't really encompassing the full role that she's played in every region of the world.
Despite her almost 4 years of traveling the globe, meeting 150 heads of state and government, Trump says Harris is inexperienced and unaccomplished.
She is a radical left lunatic who will destroy our country.
Her response?
If you got something to say it to my face.
Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News at the White House.
Voice of America's Jessica Stone has additional reporting on this. She's live for us at the White House. Hi, Jessica. Kamala Harris announced her running mate this week, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. How will that choice impact the direction of her foreign policy if she does end up winning?
Well, vice presidents don't always have a large role in foreign policy, but Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, has garnered a lot of attention for his position and his longstanding relationship with China. He's been there 30 times. He was an English teacher there during the Tiananmen Square massacre and even got married on the anniversary of that date. As a congressman, though, he did stand up for human rights in China. He was a vocal critic of the communist government. And in 2016, he also took a position on Beijing's expansion in the South China Sea, saying that that should be something that the U.S. should counter. The interesting thing here, too, is that foreign policy may have also played a role in her selection because she chose Walz over Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, a very powerful and influential swing state. He had been very outspoken and continues to be against the student-led protests against the war in Gaza. And also he's taken a vocal position against anti-Semitism. Democratic progressives actually campaigned against him as the pick, arguing that he would not help Vice President Kamala Harris win the election in November, 50 of them writing a letter to her indicating such. And it's important to note that there's a division in the Democratic Party itself over the war in Gaza, that especially young progressives are not in favor of Israel's prosecution of that war and of how the U.S. is backing Israel.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about young voters in just a little bit, but there seems to be still an open question about whether we'll see a debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and the former president. What's the latest? Are we getting one in September?
That seems to be the month in question. Trump had this long, rambling discussion with reporters yesterday, and he actually asked for 3 different debates with Kamala Harris, but initially, he was loath to even engage with her. He had promised that he would be doing a September 4th debate with Biden. When she came on the ticket, he said, I'm not going to commit to debating her. Now we've seen a full reversal of that. ABC News now confirming that both candidates will do a debate on September 10th on ABC News. Trump is actually proposing these additional debates, but we have not yet got confirmation from the other networks, NBC and Fox, as to whether those will take place. We'll see if we will get more than one opportunity to hear these 2 spar in September. Back to you.
Okay, Jessica, please do stay with us. I'd like to get your views on our next story as well. Republican vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance is the first person from the millennial generation to run on a U.S. major party presidential ticket. VOA's Elizabeth Cherneff looks at how some millennial voters see November's election.
It is my great privilege to introduce my husband and the next Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance.
J.D. Vance will be one of the youngest U.S. vice presidents if he wins election with Donald Trump in November. Vance and his wife, Usha, are both members of the millennial generation, a demographic group the Pew Research Center says consists of people born between 1981 and 1996. Millennials in the U.S. face economic challenges, including high student loan debt and housing costs. They are known for quickly adapting to technology and being shaped by the September 11, 2001 terror attacks, which Vance says changed his life.
After 9/11, I did what thousands of other young men my age did in that time of soaring patriotism and love of country. I enlisted in the United States Marines.
Texas millennial Sarah Gardner says Republicans are ready for Vance.
We have a lot of older politicians in Washington, and some of them have been there for far too long, so it's great to have somebody with new ideas that can bring a new perspective and really represent the younger voters.
With Kamala Harris now the Democratic Party's likely presidential candidate, public opinion polls are showing a spike in support for her among younger voters.
In this election, we know young voters will be key, and we know your vote cannot be taken for granted. It must be earned, and that is exactly what we will do.
In California, millennial David Mraz says Harris is the best choice for younger voters.
But I think in this moment, to have a competitive race, I think she is a fresh face. I think she has the qualifications to assume the role, and I think she can take it to Trump.
Combined, millennial voters and those from the younger Generation Z make for a powerful voting bloc, says Denora Getachew, the CEO of DoSomething.org, a group that encourages young people to take part in activism and service.
If they turn out to vote at the same levels they did in 2020, they'll make up 37% of the electorate, right? So there's step 1, actually register to vote. Step 2, turn out to vote, or show up for what, as we say.
While millennial voters are politically diverse, they generally agree on the need for change.
We're seeing America crumble down to the ground, and that's because the people who are elected are not of our age. The next generation are people who are 20s, in their 30s, and their 40s. Why do we have people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s representing us?
70% of millennial voters say inflation and cost of living are their top election issues, according to a U.S. News and World Report poll. Those economic concerns rank far ahead of reproductive rights, gun violence, and climate change. Elizabeth Cherneff, VOA News, Washington.
VOA's Jessica Stone is still live with us from the White House. Jessica, we heard in Elizabeth's report that economic issues are particularly important to younger voters. What do the polls tell us about that?
Well, according to a Survey USA poll between August 2nd and 4th, so very recent, Trump is now leading Vice President Kamala Harris among voters ages 18 to 34, so that young demographic. That's by 4 points. But another 4% or 4 points are undecided. Harris, though, leading Trump by 10 points in the next demographic, 35 to 49. At the same time, these are new polls, and Axios Generation Lab poll had Harris leading Trump by 20 points among Generation Z, the younger part of this youth generation. Harris is really the only, she's only been in the race, remember, since July 21st. So we still have to see the polls kind of catch up to the public sentiment about her as the leading, the top of the ticket, because of course she was not prior to July 21st. It is also worth noting that many Generation Z voters, those ages 18 to 27, are voting in a presidential race for the first time. And this youth vote has been really critical for Joe Biden and his win in 2020. We're also seeing a lot of youth outreach, as you saw in that piece, by the Harris campaign, memes about going brat and having a lot of connection with celebrities in the youth community, vouching for her candidacy. So turnout for the youth vote is expected to be a big part and a big factor in what decides this election.
And Jessica, let's drill down specifically on the young voter sentiment in key swing states where these elections can be decided. What have we learned about that?
Yeah, swing states, there's about 5 or 6 of them throughout the United States. And because of the Electoral College in the United States, it's not a popular vote, of course, that makes the president win. It's the Electoral College vote. And in those particular states, we do see that there are Trump and Harris are actually in a dead heat among swing state voters overall. And their main issues, immigration, inflation, which you saw in that piece, political extremism. And they really only think that candidates can do something about the first two. And they give a little more credit to Trump than they do to Harris on those issues of immigration and inflation. Generation Z is really feeling the pinch of the economic realities in the United States. They pay more for housing and they have more debt than millennial voters did 10 years ago at the same time in their lives. That's according to a Washington Post analysis. So, you know, we talked earlier about the debate that's just been scheduled in September. Voters still haven't seen a matchup. These issues will come up in the debate and hopefully give these voters, especially the young voters, if they tune in, more information upon which to decide on who to vote for this November.
Absolutely. VOA's Jessica Stone joining us live from the White House on this Friday. Have a great weekend, Jessica. It's always great talking to you.
Good to see you, Susan.